Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. So this is part 2 of my top 10 albums of 2023. If you haven't watched part 1, make sure you go back and check that out. I cover about half my honorable mentions, and then I cover number 6 through 10 of my top 10 list. So I got the rest of my list for you today. There's a bunch of links down below. Make sure you check them out. There's links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist I put together every week, and the Patreon page. Make sure you go check all that out. Of course, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. And then make sure you come back tomorrow and watch Ian's top 10. I finally got Ian to sit down and record his own video after about 2 years I've been asking him to do a video. He's going to do his top 10 tomorrow. So before I get into my top 5, I want to go through some more honorable mentions that I had. I've been a big MXPX fan for a really long time, and they released their self-titled album back in 2018. I was really impressed with it. I thought that was one of the best albums that MXPX had done in their entire career. So when I found out they were releasing a new album this year, of course I was excited for it. The new album is called Find a Way Home, and when I compared this to the self-titled album, I don't think it's as good as that album. I think there's a couple of songs on here that really I can kind of do without. Even though this is a really good album, I still listen to it pretty regularly. And I think there's a couple of tracks on here that are going to be staples for the band moving forward. But just to maybe take 2 or 3 tracks off of this one, I think it would have been a better album overall. Another album that was really heavily considered for my top 10. I think when I did my mid-year top 3 or top 5, it was right there. I don't remember if it was actually in my top 5 or just outside. I really enjoyed this album though. I really wasn't expecting to. The name of the album is Gloria by Sam Smith, and kind of going back and going over this album, I think it's probably one of the best pop albums of the last several years. And like I said, one that, is not really my kind of music, but I still really, really enjoyed this album. I think one of the bigger albums that everyone seemed to hate in 2023 is one that I really enjoyed, even though, it's got some issues. I understand that. I understand, some of the hate the album gets. But the album is 72 Seasons by Metallica. And I think the big issue, I did a whole review on this album after it came out. My issue with this album is some of these songs are just too long. I think what would have helped on this album would be to have, someone a little more independent in the room as producer and say, hey, look, guys, we need to make some changes to these songs. And I know that's not how Metallica operates, and Metallica is going to be, Lars is always going to be one of the bigger voices in the room. And, for what this album is, I still really enjoyed it. I think it's still the best Metallica album of the 2000s, even though, Hardwired to Self-Destruct is pretty close to this one. But, like I said, I think this is the best thing that they've done in over 20 years. So if you watched the video last Sunday with me and Ian, my next honorable mention is one that Ian had, I think at number 3 for 2023. He really enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy it as much, even though I still think it is a really good album. I think it's Alice Cooper's best album in almost 20 years. But the name of the album is Road, and this is so what the purpose of this album is Alice Cooper wanted to create an album to really showcase his road band. This is all recorded live in studio. There's no overdubs on it. And it's a fantastic album. It's got this almost like grit to this album that really wasn't there since the mid part of the 70s. And, I think this is his best album since, probably 2005. But, it's the one album, probably the biggest album of his career solo-wise, that has that feel that a lot of those earlier Alice Cooper Band albums had. Another album that I know a lot of people out there absolutely hated, got a bunch of mixed reviews. I really thought it was a good album, though. I don't have my top 10, but I still think it's a really solid album, one that I've listened to quite a few times. But it's a new album from 30 Seconds to Mars. This is, it's the end of the world, but it's a beautiful day. This is very different. And I was never a big 30 Seconds to Mars fan. I think I like their first album. It's really kind of about it. But this is different than anything else they've done in their career. And I think a lot of people hated the transition that this band has made with this album. But it's got this it's a really heavily synth pop album. There's some new wave elements on here. Like I said, stuff that you wouldn't really expect from 30 Seconds to Mars, but I think it really works on this album. And, I'd love to see what they do moving forward if they kind of go back to that classic 30 Seconds to Mars sound. because the amount of hate that this album got. But like I said, I really enjoyed it. Another album that took me a couple of listens to really kind of get into it is a new album from Black Pumas, Chronicles of a Diamond. So when Black Pumas released their first album a couple of years ago, it took me a little while to finally get around to checking it out. And when I did, I absolutely fell in love with that album, and I was really excited for this new album. And the first time I listened to it, I didn't quite know what to think of it. And really, like I said, it took me a couple listens to really get into it. But, Black Pumas, they're a really interesting band, but they got like, it's like funk meets R&B meets psychedelic meets rock. It's like really interesting mixture of all these different genres that, it's one that by the time I sat down and made my top 10 list, it's one that I really heavily considered for the top 10. That's how much I really enjoyed this album. So the next one, I was never a huge fan of this band. I like some of their songs here or there, but over the last couple of years, I got more and more into their music. One of my sons was a big fan of theirs, and that's really kind of where I started listening to their music from. And when they announced they were releasing a new album, of course I was interested in it. I streamed it. I think on the release day or a day or two after it was released. And I thought it had this like. I didn't really know what to think of it at first. It didn't sound like their last couple of albums. It sounded more like their earlier stuff. And the more I listened to it, the more I enjoyed it. The name of the album is So Much for Stardust by Fall Out Boy. And this is, I think, Fall Out Boy has a really interesting career because their first album had this like punk rock kind of vibe to it. And then they went a little more like pop rock kind of stuff after that, where I think this album it does a really good job of blending what their sound is now, which, like I said, is more that like pop rock stuff with a little bit of the grit that they had earlier in their career. And I think that they've done a really good job kind of pairing those two eras of the band together with this album. And then the last of my honorable mentions is an album that I didn't really want to enjoy, to be completely honest. I haven't really loved any of this band's music since the 70s. But the more I listen to this album, damn it, the more I like it. The name of the album is Techne Diamonds by Rolling Stones. I'm a big Rolling Stones fan, but I'm more of like a 60s and 70s Rolling Stones fan. That's the era of the band that I really love. Most of the stuff they did in the 80s, at least in my opinion, is largely forgettable. Some of their 90s stuff is okay, but I haven't enjoyed their last few albums. And I didn't think I was going to enjoy this one either. I bought it, I think it was a day or two after it was released. I got a good deal on it. That's why I picked it up. And, I was actually pretty impressed with it. It's, I think it kind of harkens back to some of the glory days of the Rolling Stones. And it's just a really solid, good listen. And to kick off my top 5 is an album that, for much of the year, to be honest, it went back and forth between like number 1 or number 2 for me. And of course, it helps that it was released earlier in the year. It was released back on February 3rd. So there was a lot of time for other things to get released to push it down. So it did end up at number 5 for me. The name of the album is God Save the Teen by Modon. So Modon's a really interesting musician. Started out his career as the drummer for Scary Kids, Scaring Kids. And then he kind of moved from that band, started a rap career, released 3 rap albums, and then in 2021 he released Internet Killed the Rockstar, which is probably one of my favorite rock albums of the last 4 or 5 years. Absolutely love that album. And so when he announced that he was releasing a new album this in 2023, I was really excited for it. He released, I think it was 2 or 3 singles in the lead up to the release, and then like a month or 2 before the album came out, he announced that he had scrapped that whole idea. He wasn't going to release any of those singles, scrapped the entire album and re-recorded an entire new one. And, it was interesting because he wanted to have this, like, what he talked about was, when a lot of us were younger, you didn't have, 4 or 5 singles being released before an album came out. And you like, nowadays, that's one thing I've complained about multiple times over the last couple of years is, by the time an album comes out, you've already heard a third of the album. He wanted to have that anticipation for that new release. So he didn't release any of the songs until release day. And like I said, I really, really enjoyed this album. There's a couple of tracks on here that maybe won't age as good as he had hoped they would. He was engaged to Avril Lavigne when he recorded this album, so she does feature on one track. And then there's another song called Avril Song, which when I saw him play it live, he even kind of talked about it a little bit because by that time they had broken up. But it's still a really great album. He's got a great cover of Iris by the Goo Goo Dolls on here. Wolves is probably my favorite track on here. SOS is another great track. Just so many other great ones on this album. There's like maybe one, maybe two songs on this entire album that, I wouldn't even consider those skippable tracks, but there's tracks that maybe if they were reworked a little bit more, maybe would have been a better overall song. But this is produced by John Feldman, who also produced Internet Killed the Rock Star, and they're just both great albums. The album that I got at number 4 is an album that, before it was released, I didn't really know what to expect. I wasn't a big fan of this band's last couple of albums. They were just okay at best. And then they released an album that, rivals some of the best music of their career, which is really rare for a band that's, over 30 years into their career. The name of the album is Tomorrow Never Comes by Rancid. I've been a big Rancid fan ever since the first time I listened to Out Come the Wolves. And, I think in the 2000s, I think 2003 they released Indestructible, which is I think it's probably one of their top maybe 4 albums. Then after that, Let the Dominoes Fall, I guess it was an okay album. It was released in 2009. But the 2 albums they released after that, like I said, they were just okay at best. So I didn't have really high expectations when I listened to this album. And actually, to be completely honest, the day this album dropped, I wasn't even going to buy a physical copy of it. I streamed it on the way to the record store. I was blown away by it. First off, I will say there's, I think, 16 songs on here, and this album is 28 minutes long. So, classic punk rock songs. And this album, probably more so than anything else they've released in the 2000s, I think, has more of that Rancid sound from that they were, so classic and known for back in the 90s. It has more of a vibe, a 90s vibe, than anything else they've released since then. It's just a damn good album, and I would probably put this. I think this is probably one of the top 5 albums that Rancid has ever released. Like I said, very rare for a band this late in their career to do something like that. So if you watch the Sunday video with me and Ian, you already know what my top 3 are. Number 3 is an album that I talked about the beginning of last year as one of my most anticipated albums of the year. I had copies of this album on pre-order for a year before the album came out. That's how much I was really looking forward to it. I wasn't really sure what to expect with it. I was hoping it was going to be a good album. I think it really lived up to expectations, even though I do have a couple of issues with it. Name of the album is One More Time by Blink-182. Of course, I'm a huge Blink fan. I have been for, probably since 96 or 97. I've been a big fan of their music. And Tom DeLonge left the band after Neighborhoods was released in 2011. I think it was 2015 by the time he officially left the band. Matt Skiba from Alkaline Trio took over for him, and they released a couple of really good albums. I thought California, I thought Nine were both really good albums. I think California, there was a deluxe version of California that was released that was a better version. And then I thought Nine was probably even a better album than Neighborhoods before Tom DeLonge left. And then in 2022, it was announced that Tom DeLonge was finally rejoining the band. They were working on new material. And like I said, didn't really know what to expect because when they released Neighborhoods, I know a lot of people love Neighborhoods. I was not a big fan of it. It sounded like an album that was recorded by a band that was really disjointed. It really came through on the music. They didn't record anything in person together. And I was really hoping that this new album was going to be something different. And, like I said, I've got issues with the production on here. Yes, I know there's a lot of complaints about how compressed it is, but I think it really only comes through on a couple of songs. And even with the compression issues on this album, I still don't think it doesn't detract, I think, from how good this album is. And it's, obviously one of my favorite albums of the year. So the album that I got at number 2, when I did my mid-year top 3 or top 5, I don't remember how many albums I had in that video, I had a number 1, and I even talked about at that time how impressed I was with this album, and I really didn't think there was going to be anything that would top it. And of course, it's at number 2, so I guess there was one album that at least in my opinion, was a little bit better. But the album is But Here We Are by the Foo Fighters. I haven't been a big Foo Fighters fan. I loved their first couple of albums. Here or there, they've released some really great albums. It's probably been about a decade or so since they released a really great album. So I didn't really know what to expect with this one, especially with the passing of Taylor Hawkins. I didn't really know how that was going to affect the sound. But, I think everything that Dave Grohl has gone through, in the year before this album came out. I think he really kind of poured into this album. You could hear the pain and anguish and the emotion from Dave Grohl really come through on this album. And I think it's one of the things that made this, one of the best Foo Fighters albums ever. And then, of course, the album I got at number one. If you follow me on social media, you already know what this album is. I've played it a bunch. I've posted it probably 1,000 times on social media since it came out. The album is Austin by Post Malone. I was never a big Post Malone fan, even though I do have a Post Malone album up on my wall right about there. I was not a fan of his music until I listened to this album. And, since then I've actually went out and bought all of his albums since I listened to this one. And this is a different album than anything he's done in his career. I know some people are talking about this being like a rock album. It's not a rock album, even though, he does play guitar on every track. It's definitely more of a rock-oriented album. It definitely has strong rock elements on it. It's not a rock album. It's still a Post Malone album, and it just, I love what he does with these songs. Though it's, all these songs were originally when he sat down and started writing these songs, they're all written acoustically, which I would have loved to see. I'd love to see him release an acoustic version of this album. It might even be better, but it's a Post Malone mix of hip hop and rap with rock, with some new wave, with some kind of folky elements also. It's just it's a fun listen from beginning to end. There's not a bad track on here. Though I think when I did when I talked about this album earlier this year, when I did a review on it, I think there was one track on here I said was a skippable track. I'd have to actually go back and even look and see which one it was. Texas Tea. Texas Tea was the one track I said was a skippable track. But even since I did my review and even talked about it, even that song is even growing on me. And it's one that, I, ever since this album came out back July 28th, and since I bought it, I don't think there's been a week that's gone by where I haven't listened to this album. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what your favorite albums of 2023 were. 2023 was a great year for music. I'm really hopeful for 2024. Hopefully it's just as good, if not even better. There's some albums I'm definitely looking forward to in 2024. And hopefully we'll get some of those tracks or some of those albums, like I said, that are not even on my radar, that I absolutely fall in love with. And we'll see what the year brings us. But let me know what you guys think. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me the old thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.